Greetings, Earth Explorers. I just wanted to bring something to your attention this morning. Normally, I would do this as a live event on another service on Sunday nights, but this will not wait. So I thought I would bring this to you as an emergency analysis this morning because of the OFA, that's the Organizing for Action insurrection that is occurring in D.C. This weekend. So in 2013, Barack Obama formed the OFA as a 501c4 nonprofit. That means they do not have to report the identity of their donors. As we reported to you last week, the organization is headquartered in Chicago. Its mission is to harness the energy of any president's re-election campaign for future legislative fights. The group advocates on policy issues such as gun violence prevention, climate change, LGBT issues, and immigration. In February of 2013, the New York Times reported that donors contributing or raising $500,000 or more to Organizing for Action would put them on the group's National Advisory Board, granting the privilege of attending quarterly update meetings given by the president. White House press spokesman Jay Carney denied that access to the president was being sold, stating that OFA was an independent organization and referred specific questions to the OFA staff. On March 8th, Messina told CBS News that the president might attend a founders summit, but stated, and I quote, "Whether you're a volunteer or a donor, we can't and we won't guarantee access to any government officials. But just as the president and administration officials deliver updates on the legislative process to Americans and organizations across the ideological spectrum, there may be occasions when members of Organizing for Action are included in those updates. These are not opportunities to lobby. They are briefings on the positions the president has taken and the status of seeing them through," close quote. Now, questions have been raised about the aims and the eligibility of Organizing for Action to continue to maintain the BarackObama.com website and also control the Barack Obama Twitter account. Use of these accounts by Organizing for America is not prevented by campaign finance laws. To this date, that linkage is current and is maintained. On December 17th, 2013, OFA tweeted a photograph of a young man with thick-rimmed glasses wearing black and red plaid onesie pajamas and cradling a mug. The accompanying text read, "Wear pajamas, drink hot chocolate, talk about getting health insurance." The tweet linked to the OFA website, which encouraged individuals to discuss Obamacare during the holiday season with those family members who are uninsured and encouraged them to sign up. The tweet and the pajama-clad man featured in it were quickly dubbed Pajama Boy and mocked across social media, particularly by conservatives. You always wanted to know where that term came from. That's where it came from. Now, I would talk about the funding, but that is not really the important part. You see, people are expected to attend several demonstrations in Washington, D.C. beginning this morning. Okay, and this is why I am bringing you this broadcast this early on a Saturday morning. People have taken to the streets of D.C. and across the nation demanding justice for the death of George Floyd, who died in Minneapolis after a police officer knelt on his neck for more than 8 minutes. City officials are expecting a large turnout of protesters. We have heard numbers in the 1 million range. That's why I am here today with a special edition of X Squared Radio here at the America Free Radio studios in an undisclosed location east of the Appalachian Mountains. There are several different organized protests today starting at noon. 1 million people are expected to show up at the Lincoln Memorial. I would share with you the map, but I think you could probably get that through other means. I want to cut to the chase here. The concern for Saturday is the heat, maybe. Temperatures are expected to reach 90 degrees. That could make people aggravated. Metro is planning to accommodate an increased number of riders heading downtown. First and last cars of trains will be opened. The rail cars have been closed to protect train operators from COVID-19. Evidently, we're going to find out in the next 2 or 3 weeks if COVID-19 was ever real to begin with, because either all these people are going to get sick and some of them die, or none of them will get sick and none of them will die. Either way, COVID-19 is going to be exposed. Now, the D.C. mayor, her name is Muriel Bowser. She requested that President Donald Trump remove, and I quote, all extraordinary federal law enforcement and military presence from Washington, D.C. She said the military units are operating outside of established chains of command. Now, this is a very important case to consider here. Today's National Guard remains strong in the D.C. area. They have 2,700 soldiers and airmen available to execute its missions. What are the missions in Washington, D.C.? Well, the D.C. National Guard was formed all the way back in 1802 by President Thomas Jefferson to defend the newly created District of Columbia. As such, the commanding general of the D.C. National Guard is subordinate solely and only to the President of the United States. This authority to activate the D.C. National Guard has been delegated by the President to the Secretary of Defense and further delegated to the Secretary of the Army. The D.C. National Guard is the only National Guard unit out of all the 54 states and territories which reports only to the President, not to the mayor, but to the President. The D.C. National Guard provides mission-ready personnel and units for active duty in the armed services in the time of war or national emergency. The D.C. National Guard also retains the mission as protector of the District of Columbia. The Residence Act of 1790 established that the country would create a new capital city. We already know all about this. The D.C. National Guard came about in part due to the efforts of President Thomas Jefferson, the first president to spend his term in Washington, D.C. He came into office during a time when strife between the two major political parties was threatening to tear the new country apart. Does that sound familiar to you? Soon, the commanding generals of the two closest militia units were members of President Jefferson's rival political party. Does that sound familiar? Have you heard of the war that's going on inside the Pentagon? Have you heard of the conflict between the president and the mayor of D.C.? At this point, there was only a very small regular army, and they were mostly patrolling the border. If one of those state militias or leaders were to try to force political will, there would be no way to keep them from marching on the Capitol and coercing or even overthrowing the government. Now you add 1 million OFA-inspired and trained militia or soldiers or citizens in that effort, and you get something that could be very, very powerful. President Jefferson saw just how vulnerable America's democracy would be if the will of a military general could keep the legislative body from enacting the will of the people. To prevent this, he created the D.C. National Guard. President Jefferson hand-selected his new officer, and in 1802, the D.C. National Guard held its first muster. The D.C. Guard is the only National Guard with a national mission, and that mission is to protect the federal government. Normally, American federal law specifically charges the U.S. National Guard with dual federal and state missions, as the U.S. federal government abolished the jurisdiction of the state of Maryland and states' rights in Washington, D.C. to establish a federal district. There is no elected governor to command the Guard unit. The District of Columbia National Guard unit is the only National Guard that reports just to the president. Now you can see why the president called this up. Okay. The socialists have now openly come out into the public view. They make no bones about it. The DC mayor is a de facto member of Obama's OFA. She has publicly claimed to have the authority to remove the president's National Guard protection, so OFA soldiers can remove President Trump from the White House. I quote, "We want troops from out of state, out of Washington, D.C., Mayor Bowser said. The socialists have always believed that the command of the federal government belongs to them. They are actively seeking to nullify the state's right to select their own president. For 4 years, they have lost every effort to remove the republic's president peaceably. So now they are resorting to violent overthrow before the states re-elect President Trump by an even larger margin in November. The OFA's guerrilla forces are mustering 1 million people to invade Washington, D.C. this weekend, starting this morning. The D.C. mayor appears to have attempted a coup over the military forces of the president in an effort to leave him defenseless, while the OFA guerrillas burn the White House to the ground, as they have done in dozens of cities around the country. The mayor said that she wants thousands of National Guard members from other states to return home as order is restored. Bowser said local authorities never requested guardsmen from elsewhere and are studying the legality of their deployment. In a related move to protect America from rapid deployment attacks from Chinese forces in Venezuela, President Donald Trump announced Wednesday of this week that Navy ships are being moved toward Venezuela as his administration beefs up counter-narcotics operations in the Caribbean following a U.S. drug indictment against Nicolas Maduro. The Venezuelan people continue to suffer tremendously due to Maduro and his criminal control over the country, and drug traffickers are seizing on this lawlessness. The mission involves sending additional Navy warships, surveillance aircraft, and special forces teams to nearly double the U.S. counter-narcotics capacity in the Western Hemisphere. We believe that China has been putting special forces and technology into Venezuela for over a year. Venezuela is so close to the United States that a surprise attack from that area with weaponry could damage significantly the United States. So the president has taken preemptive action. He also phoned President Putin in Russia before walking over to St. John's Church adjacent to the White House property. As you know, OFA guerrillas proved they could invade the church and burn it to the ground, but they were ordered to only make a show of strength, and they left it only partially burned. President Trump calmly walked over to the church in broad daylight to show the world that he was still president, and he was not afraid of Obama's OFA. He was showing the world that the government was still intact. President Trump may have told Putin during that call to refrain from making any provocative moves while this weekend's conflicts unfold. Keeping China from attacking and securing D.C. from the OFA without too much violence is the objective. If the weekend passes and only loud speech and chanting happens, then the president will preserve American tradition of protest and grievance. I believe they will shut down all cell phone activity to prevent internet use to coordinate the attacks. Proton, Telegram, and other encrypted communication technologies are being used by Antifa, BLM, and mercenaries recently released from prison by Democrat governors to coordinate their attacks on law enforcement. Hundreds of government soldiers and police have been injured, and some have been killed by OFA soldiers in recent days. OFA forces are suspected of having burned a 1 million square foot Amazon facility to the ground yesterday in Uplands, California, which forced the closing of Interstate 10. The blaze was reported at the warehouse in the 2200 block of West Lugonia Avenue about 5:30 a.m. About 100 employees were inside but evacuated before firefighters arrived. I believe one military tactic will be used over D.C., and that is the use of growlers. A growler is a special aircraft that's used to blank out radio communications and radar. Non-lethal weapons may be deployed to restrain OFA guerrillas and prevent them from effectively fighting while they are taken into custody. Individual fighters in uniform will be targeted first. So if you're dressed all in black and you're carrying a club and you have a mask on, you are a soldier in uniform. People without masks will be facially checked with the OFA database that the NSA has been accumulating since 2014. Parole violators will be taken into custody with priority. So I leave this special report with you from America Free Radio. Take care out there, Patriots. Be free.